Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the Transportation Symposium 2021, hosted by the Department of Civil and Environmental Engineering, Faculty of Engineering, University of the West Indies at St. Augustine. My name is Trevor Townsend. I'm the Senior Lecturer in Traffic and Transportation, and I am going to be your moderator for this afternoon session, and it's a pleasure to have you all here. As you know, this symposium has been a culmination of some work we've been doing for the last few years. And we'll be talking a little bit more about that, but sorry for the late start. We had some little technical difficulties, but I'm going to go right into today's session. Glad to have you here. And I'm going to invite our Dean of our faculty, Professor Edwin Ekwe, to give the welcoming remarks. Professor Ekwe, you can unmute your mic and share your video. Thank you very much.
Okay. Thanks a lot, Dr. Townsend. Distinguished presenters, colleagues from the University of the West Indies, ladies and gentlemen, it is indeed a pleasure for me to welcome you to the second Transportation Symposium put up by the Department of Civil and Environmental Engineering, Faculty of Engineering, the University of the West Indies, St. Augustine campus. This Transportation Symposium 2021 marks an important milestone in the development program that the department has embarked upon since 2015. It is the brainchild of the Traffic and Transportation Engineering Group. This group comprises a team of lecturers, research assistants, and cross-campus collaborators dedicated to championing data-driven analysis and the application of sound traffic and transportation engineering practices, and encouragement of interdisciplinary approaches to creating a sustainable transportation sector. These objectives have been pursued through research and inquiry, as well as public seminars and symposia. We provide a forum for the dissemination of information, discussion of ideas, and search for an advocacy as well as search of viable solutions. In this regard, the department has been engaged in several research projects. One major one being the development of traffic demand models for Trinidad, funded by a grant from the university's Research Development Impact Fund. Additionally, research is also being undertaken by some of our master's and PhD students in the following areas. 1, mode choice modeling. 2, impact of informal transit on isolated communities. 3, red light running behavior linked to engineering and psychological factors. 4, finance and government models for urban transport in developing countries. 5, development of a transportation sustainability index. 6, mapping and performance indexing of public transportation networks. 7, integration of transportation engineering and urban design elements in transit terminals. The Transportation Symposium in 2019 sought to initiate a wide-ranging discourse on some of the key land transportation issues facing the country, and was well attended. Since then, the department has been engaging with other interest groups in several seminars and webinars leading to this 3-day event. We are pleased to note that the presenters are experts, both locally and internationally, and have come from both academia as well as civil society. The fact that over 200 persons from several countries are registered for this symposium is testimony to the stature of the presenters and the relevance of the topics. We expect that the first day's presentations will plant the seeds for the discussions and workshops of day 2 and 3, and look forward to the plans for future research and advocacy which will emanate from this event. The Faculty of Engineering St. Augustine is committed to playing its part in developing graduates who will take their place in organizations which will plan, design, construct, and operate our future transportation systems for the benefit of our society and in contributing to the advancement of knowledge in this area through our research efforts. We will continue in our outreach program, which is aligned to the university's AAA strategy. On behalf of the Faculty of Engineering, I thank you all for your attention and wish you an interesting and informative symposium. God bless us all. Thanks a lot, everyone.
Thank you very much, Professor Ekwe, for those welcoming remarks. And now, folks, we go into our first presentation, and this is by Ms. Cheryl Bennett-Innes, who is the Chief Technical Officer in the Ministry of Transport, Works and Water Resources in Barbados. Mrs. Bennett-Innes is an alum of the University of the West Indies Faculty of Engineering, our own department, where she received the upper second class honors for a bachelor's degree. Then she went on to do a Master's of Engineering in Transportation Engineering at the prestigious University of California at Berkeley. She also holds a membership in the Chartered Institute of Procurement and Supply. As the CTO, Mrs. Bennett-Innes is in charge of several departments in the technical area. She's a top technical person in the ministry, has been involved in areas of planning such as the ICC World Cup Barbados team, and has been a leader in the transportation sector in Barbados. So we welcome now, and I invite her to unmute her mic and share her screen, Mrs. Cheryl Bennett-Innes.
Thank you so much, Dr. Townsend. And good afternoon, everyone. I hope everyone can see my screen clearly and hear me clearly as well. I'm honored to have been offered this opportunity to share with you some thoughts on how we in the Caribbean can overcome the challenges and provide safe, sustainable, efficient transportation systems for our people and the many visitors to our shores. Caribbean people have had to respond to a myriad of challenges from the time of Arawaks and Caribs to slavery, to independence and beyond. As a community, we've dealt with the loss of our native peoples, racial discrimination, severe weather events, natural and man-made disasters, and other disruptions. But we are resilient. We are survivors, and we recognize that we must prepare for a wide range of threats, some simultaneously, that can impact our safety, operations, and life as we know it. We remain in the grips of one such challenge now, and few industries have been hit as hard as the travel industry by the current pandemic. Well, we all know the basics. There are three modes of transportation: land, sea, and air. And each one presents challenges and issues that can be managed and should be managed. Today, I will identify some of our shared unique challenges, consider possible solutions to overcome them, take a glimpse into the future world of transportation. Efficient transportation systems help us to save time, where time is of the essence, and sustainable transportation is essential in creating livable villages, towns, and cities. Essentially, we want to safely move the greatest number of our people per hour using the least amount of space and at the lowest cost. But there is a need to reimagine how and why we move around, and how we use our limited resources should reflect this shift, focusing more on access to goods and services for everyone. Sustainable transportation is interlinked with climate change, mitigation, energy efficiency, sustainable tourism, and urban planning. And these four must have as their foundation the financial allocations, supportive technologies, and relevant policies, transportation laws, and regulations. Once we choose wisely, we will contribute to the global reduction in the effects of climate change, improving our local air quality by minimizing the emission of damaging vehicle-derived gases and particulate matter, and we can promote more active travel modes, and improve the physical health of our people. We can cater to the needs of those with mobility challenges and those that can't operate or can't afford to operate a car. And We can have less space that will be devoted to roads and car parks. This space can instead be used for agriculture, housing, offices, recreation, and cultural spaces. So these two images show a striking difference in the use of two city spaces of the same land area. On the left is the city of Florence, Italy, densely populated with 100,000 residents, and on the right is a freeway in Atlanta, Georgia, supporting urban sprawl, if you will. Which one do you think would best support a sustainable, efficient transportation system? We can focus on the aesthetic of whatever transportation system we choose to ensure its design and that of the places it serves would encourage and facilitate people wanting to spend time in our cities, towns, and other spaces instead of not even wanting to pass through them. First, I'm going to highlight a few of our regional positives. We're developing nations, but we have achieved what many developed countries have not. In general, we have universal education to secondary level. We have universal primary health care. We have stable political environments with strong social partnerships. We are blessed year-round with a lovely climate, and our culture is unique with the infectious rhythms of our music and the alluring flavors of our food and drink. The Caribbean is also well placed geographically for trade and tourism. Plus, we're close to the Panama Canal. Travel times by air and sea from tourist-generating countries and international freight or cargo routes are reasonable. Unfortunately, the focus of each Caribbean country has been to connect directly with these markets, while intra-regional and interregional transportation do not meet the needs of the countries. Our problems are also similar, and I've identified a few for each way of travel. Our policies support a car in every garage, and yet we complain about traffic congestion. We know the value of collecting and analyzing traffic data, but we don't do this routinely. We finance road improvements for motorized vehicles, but we don't adequately provide safe spaces for our cyclists, pedestrians, and the physically challenged to move, nor do we always include the cost for effective drainage infrastructure and road safety measures. Most of our countries have some form of a public transportation system, yet service to our rural, mostly lower income areas is inadequate. And studies have indicated that the alleviation of poverty isn't just dependent on family income, but the availability of services and infrastructure. We provide a nearly 24/7 public transportation schedule, but most of our off-peak buses run virtually empty. We offer little resistance to the illegal public transportation players known as pirates in Barbados, who unfairly compete with the registered operators, some of whom started as pirates themselves. But we do take action against the registered ones, some of whom also believe that to make a dollar, they must hustle and flaunt the regulations. We recognize that there is increased congestion when our educational facilities are in session, but we do not try staggered operation hours, nor optimize routes to cater for those students and staff trips. We have development planning processes and departments, but we don't always require developers to build to minimize the distances between housing, jobs, and supporting services. We have produced exceptional athletes, but appear to be among the unhealthiest people on earth. We have a high level of NCDs, non-communicable diseases. Supporting active transportation can help. And in the early 90s, we experienced a surge in the importation of more affordable secondhand vehicles, but we did not set or have emission requirements and standards for them. Our airspace and the oceans that connect us have also proven to be major obstacles in how best they're used for transportation purposes. While we all want these socially necessary services, we do not consistently contribute our fair share of the cost of providing them. Air network routes reflect the lack of regional integration. Travel numbers from outside the Caribbean are significantly more than travel movements within. Our history of air carriers, BW, Liat, and Air Jamaica, reveal that they were all related entities, and decisions on the mix of aircraft type, hub locations, routes, all appear to have been in response to the desires of largely non-regional interests and not so much to the needs of the region. And by 2003, BW carried over 1.4 million passengers annually, 600 plus Caribbean and 60 international departures every week, had 70 daily flights, carried 8,100 tons of cargo per year, employed 2,350 staff, and earned approximately US $276 million per year. Internationally, the Caribbean market is just a dot in the industry, a desirable dot perhaps, but it's still a dot. In 2006, however, the failure of management and unions to agree on new contract terms resulted in the bankruptcy of BW, and after 66 years of operation, it was replaced by Caribbean Airlines. Each of our territories is a member of at least one of many Caribbean organizations, all of which promote regional transportation cooperation. But we are often guilty of publicly airing grievances and discord over the operation of our regional air carriers. We have neglected to seek a viable sea link between our Caribbean countries. While there are regular boat shipments of cargo, the setup and operation of a passenger transportation system by sea remains elusive. Our citizens demand efficient and other inter-island travel choices. Daily ferry services are only available between island nations such as Trinidad and Tobago, St. Vincent and the Grenadines, St. Kitts and Nevis, and the Bahamian archipelago. Island hopping via seasonal ferry service is also possible between Dominica, Guadeloupe, Martinique, and St. Lucia. These are just a few of the regional ferries run by various owners with many styles, sizes, and capabilities. The high cost of shipping between islands is closely related to port efficiency. Freight rates are high, despite the region's geographical advantage. We pursue trade agreements that with developed nations where we experience transportation and trade cost disadvantages because the volume of traffic we generate individually is comparatively small. Yet early trade agreements under the Caribbean Free Trade Association, or CARIFTA, were short-lived due to self-imposed regional trade barriers. Other regional entities exist to promote cooperation: CARICOM, CSME, OECS, and the Association of Caribbean States. We expend great effort individually to attract international airlines and cruise lines to our shores, but the stiff competition amongst ourselves and the various minimum revenue guarantee arrangements most likely do not secure the best deals possible for any of us. There is no single regional policy on customs and immigration systems to simplify the processes and to allow for easy travel and trade. Not all signed on to the 2009 Carry Pass project. This was a credit card-sized document that would have allowed hassle-free entry to and exit from Caribbean countries. The success of the ICC Cricket World Cup 2007 movements demonstrated the possibilities. We use public funding to improve and expand our port, air, and sea infrastructure, but the airlines and cruise lines do not contribute in proportion to their use of the provided facilities. Typically, these operators pass the charges for landing and port fees onto the passenger via the ticket costs. We need to develop port infrastructure to handle increased traffic, improve site security, accommodate the berthing of larger ships, and provide efficient terminal services for passengers and cargo, such as online immigration clearance, fully automated cranes, all of which require major investment. The trend is now to have private-public partnerships, P3 agreements for the development and management of our air and seaport operations. But not all of these arrangements have been beneficial or successful, even in the developed countries. The expansion of the Panama Canal meant an increase in foreign trade with the arrival of megaships. All islands, however, are not ready to receive megaships, and we need to figure out, do they need to be? Now, although the Caribbean may have had many transportation challenges, the recent episode with the Ever Given in the Suez Canal shows that for every challenge, no matter how tough, there can be a resolution. It's an example of how well one megaship functioned with the involvement and collaboration of many international companies. But unfortunately, it also highlights the risks that crews take on, because a ship sailing under the Panamanian flag, Japanese owned, operated by a German company with an Italian crew and stuck in Egypt, has no international guarantees or rights for its workers, apparently, not to end up in a kind of a floating prison. As of May 1st, 2021, this crew was still on board. Overall, we have approved national transportation plans, but we often lack the support and actions needed to implement even the data-driven policies because they're perceived as undesirable by the public. And regionally, developing a regional transportation plan does not appear to have been given the attention that it deserves. We're going to take a look at some possible solutions. To solve our problems, we must take on board everyone's concerns. While I was at St. Augustine, I resided in what was then Milner Hall, now called Freedom Hall. And when I attended UC Berkeley, I lived at International House. Both of these were wonderful experiences, and they taught me what it was like to live with a diverse group of people from different origins and backgrounds, all living and sleeping under one roof. Those were the days that I started many of my multicultural friendships. Students of all nationalities who were on both sides of conflicts, but were able to foster understanding amongst ourselves because we came to know each other as human beings. We learned that we did not have to agree, but we could communicate and work together to achieve common goals. This spirit of cooperation is key to the collective goal. And at the 19th session of the Commission for Sustainable Development that was held in New York in May 2011, the participants deliberated over transportation and made recommendations for action, a few of which I now share with you, condensed, of course. First is a sustainable transportation, an essential component of sustainable development and economic growth. Second, we must optimize existing infrastructure and transportation services and their expansion and connectivity for people and goods. Third, we must improve public transportation systems to achieve more sustainable development. Four, we must foster regional transportation integration and corridor development efforts to use the full potential of multicultural, multi-country infrastructure. And five, we must promote training and research development of transportation systems through the strengthening of education and research institutions. We're also now going to take a look at public transportation. Now, the role of transportation professionals is providing the necessary information and presenting the data in such a way that the recommendations made will guide the development of sound, coordinated and integrated transportation policies that will be implemented and have the desired outcome. This also means securing buy-in of the traveling public by including them in the discussions at the planning stages through community meetings and similar engagement opportunities. This is a group who typically live that first and last mile challenge every day. The low-hanging fruit for most islands will be to improve public transport services. Barbados, for instance, has a transport authority charged with regulating privately owned public transport units, but it needs additional staff and its powers are limited. The Transport Board manages the government-owned units, and under an arrangement called the Transport Augmentation Program, or TAP, it also manages about 100 privately owned units. The Transport Authority is fully funded by the government, while the Transport Board receives a subsidy. A future mass transit authority has been mentioned frequently, but the who, what, where, and how it will operate are yet to be determined. The best public transport systems provide service that is safe, timely, responsive, accessible, and convenient. It is expected that any mass transit authority will be charged with the rationalization and restructuring of routes, the introduction of new routes, planning and design of supporting digital and physical infrastructure projects, including transfer facilities, the development of performance measures for the network, oversight of any new fare policy development, and the creation of a public outreach and education campaign. Some developing countries are trying bus rapid transits. I believe Trinidad and Tobago is looking at that as well. And these are essentially large buses that will run on segregated lanes parallel to local traffic. These systems are moderately priced when compared to subway and metro systems, but they're still out of reach to most of our islands, bearing in mind limited land space, land acquisition costs, and the mountainous terrain of some. Any push towards public transport would need measures to support their use, such as parking charges and perhaps vehicle license plate restriction schemes to get people out of their cars and onto the public transportation. Now, regional air transportation is fragmented, and the connectivity has always been a concern. We also know that a perfect flight is one that is nonstop and direct. A point-to-point system is where passengers fly from point A to point B with no stops in between. This allows for better utilization of aircraft and crew and minimizes travel time because there is no need to disembark and transfer to another plane. There's also no need to rely on other flights being on time at any one airport, and this system is not as affected by weather or by other delays. The con of this system is that the low frequency of flights per day, no connecting flights, the high number of routes, and the larger fleet that would be necessary to cover all of the countries, and of course, high operation costs and the many flight teams that would be needed. Some airlines, to minimize costs use efficient hub and spoke systems. Hubs mean airlines can have extensive route networks and streamline operations that should result in lower fares. Hubs should allow for feeder flights with lower passenger volumes through them. Then by grouping those passengers, they would have fewer empty seats for the flights onto the more popular destinations. Hubs also provide a centralized work base for the airline employees, allow for quicker mechanical fixes, and provide options to swap aircraft, resulting in significantly reduced operating costs. There is a con to this system, and that is the inflexibility, because a change at the hub or delays at a spoke affects the entire network. And it would appear that an efficient hub and spoke system would suit our needs best, but would obviously require considerable negotiation and agreement between our governments. You take a look at ferries. In June 2017, after 11 years of operation by contracted operators, it was reported in Trinidad media that the government learned that there were no arrangements in place for the maintenance of the Australian manufactured inter-island ferry vessels. On the arrival of the leased ferry from Malta in June 2019, Martin George, the chairman of the Tobago Business Chamber, was quoted as saying that the cost of US $38,915 per day to lease the vessel might seem quite prohibitive, but given the cost of not having a reliable ferry service to Tobago's economy, this cost is not important at this time. Others commented as well. For instance, the president of Tobago's Unique Bed and Breakfast and Self-Catering Association, Kay Trotman, said at the time that the cost of to lease the ferry is a reflection that the government is going all out to show its commitment to the tourism sector and Tobago's economy. The Trinidad and Tobago government also shared at that time that 2 new fast ferries were to arrive in 2020. I well remember my first ride on the Maid of the Mist ferry at Niagara Falls as a teenager, and that experience was a factor in my selection of my master's thesis entitled A Feasibility Study of a Ferry System Along the West Coast of Barbados. And I was really hopeful that our islands would have been connected by sea well before 2021. And I also note that today's ferries can now be designed for fully electric operation. What is the cost of the Caribbean economy by us not having a reliable inter-island country water transportation service? Why haven't our governments gone all out to show commitment to the region's inter-island travel needs, and by extension, our collective tourism sector? And as islands with a multitude of unofficial ports of entry, how do we strengthen our national and regional security in relation to seaports while remaining easily accessible to legitimate travel? We'll now have a quick glimpse at the future and perhaps how we could get there. Now, the Caribbean is a grouping of 4 intertwined organizations: the ACS, the OECS, CARICOM, and of course, CMSE. Unfortunately, implementation of various projects and actions on initiatives put forward by these bodies have stalled, and cooperation will be needed by our nations to reach our regional transportation goals. If I had to sum up the future of transportation in a phrase, I would probably use that there's an app for that, because technology will be a major player. We must be willing to both explore what exists in this field and create our own. And a great place to start is with our education policies. Are our students now being taught what is currently relevant for tomorrow? What are we doing to help those degreed students in the workforce in jobs that will contribute to the country's future path? Information and communication technology is leading the way. Almost every job requires some ICT skills. And these are the skills that can be employed to transform businesses and increase productivity. Now, here's one example of what our Caribbean youngsters are up to. This is O'Shane Dunstan, who wants to design and make his own cars. He started making wooden miniatures operated by cell phone in his community in Clarendon, Jamaica. He wants to learn more and needs access to the technical training available at a local automotive school. Our educational systems and policies need to be able to assist him and others like him. I also recently read an interview with Professor Stephen Gift of the UE St. Augustine, who was speaking about his mission to shift the UE campuses from the traditional focus on teaching, learning, traditional focus on teaching, learning, and research to focusing now on innovation and entrepreneurship as well. And I believe this shift will help our graduates to change our future transportation landscape for the future. There are many examples of how innovative ideas were translated into successful operations. When I was a student in California, we used Super Shuttle all the time. And this company was started in '83 in Los Angeles when its founder and a group of his friends couldn't pack themselves and their ski gear into a regular taxi. Super Shuttle went on to become one of the leaders in shared airport shuttles and one of the first to implement computerized dispatch services. It expanded across the US and Latin America into Canada, Europe, Asia, carrying more than 8 million passengers a year. Unfortunately, however, they ceased operation in December 2019, reportedly because of the increased costs and the stiff competition that they face from Uber and Lyft. We also know about micromobility. This is the ability of movement through minimalistic means for short distances using vehicles like bikes or scooters. It's the latest trend, particularly for crowded cities. Does anyone here remember segways? Now, they were supposed to be permanently change our urban mobility, but fewer of them were sold and most of them ended up as part of mall patrols. Barbados police force acquired a few, and some were also used in Barbados for some off-road tourist trails. Last year, Segway announced that it was ending production due to lack of demand, and it would appear that its problems were more social than technological. They were heavy, expensive, about $5,000 US each, and awkward looking. In 2015, the Chinese robotics firm Ninebot bought the company, and that same year, a cameraman you can see in that photo on a Segway crashed into Usain Bolt after a race at the World Athletics Championships. Technology has made a huge difference in how today's bikes and scooters are used and how one pays for them. They account now for about 60% of all rides shorter than 5 miles in the USA. Daimler and BWA have formed Hive. Ford has now got Spin. A former Uber employee also launched Birds. These scooters are preferred because they're fast. They're about 15 miles per hour. They're fun. They're effortless. They're lighter. They're foldable, and they're easy to maneuver on crowded city streets. The scooters are a great fit for dense, flat cities and our Caribbean climate. The only issue we have is how do you easily carry bags and packages on them? Now, we also are aware that there are mobility systems, so car sharing like taxi and micro mobility services can all be part of one ecosystem using one app. And the future of shared transportation, and that becomes the future of shared transportation in cities. Companies like Zipcar and Uber match idle vehicles with empty seats to smartphone technology and urbanism, creating a more precise and flexible transportation system. So here's a fun fact for you. Uber really is a software company. They don't own cars, but they're the largest taxi company in the world. Uber is now introducing a new multimodal feature in its app where riders will be able to, for the entire journey, combine UberX with walking directions, city bus, subway, train, and even bike and scooter connections in major cities. There's another fact as well. Airbnb becomes the biggest hotel company, but they don't own any of their properties. So it is feasible for a region to consider collaborating to develop a Caribbean app to permit travelers to combine flights, cruises with ground transportation, accommodation, and attractions across our different islands. The future, therefore, appears to be in providing services to people who want to save time by not doing certain things for themselves. In the future, there's also something called MaaS, which is mobility as a service. It's one promising way to lure people away from their favorite method of transportation, which is cars. It is multimodal as well and demand responsive. It offers commuters tailor-made travel plans through a digital platform that provides real-time transportation information, payment and transaction processing. Instead of multiple ticketing and payment operations, the traveler has access to various modes of transportation: bus, metro, car, or bicycle sharing, or private operators like ride-hailing, taxis, and ride-sharing. And this customer-centered service can also contribute to improvements in the living conditions and accessibilities of our cities and rural areas. The entire MaaS concept entails three key components. One, offering a service with customer or travel transportation needs as the main focus, offering mobility rather than transportation, and offering integration of transportation services, information, payment, and ticketing. There's, of course, also our next type of vehicle, which is electric vehicles. Barbados' national energy policy provides the framework for moving the island from a fossil fuel-based economy to one principally based on renewable energy sources. There are three components, including seeking to retrofit a number of street lights, financing a fleet of government electric vehicles. The Transport Board now operates 33 fully accessible Wi-Fi enabled, GPS monitored electric buses, and another 14 have been purchased. The ministry was assigned one of those vehicles, a Nissan Leaf, for this pilot project. The third component is in support of capacity and public awareness to promote sustainable energy. And the 2030 vision calls for the elimination of the use of diesel and gasoline for local transport. This will require retrofitting of the existing fleet and or restricting importation of conventional vehicles and giving incentives for importation of electric and alternative renewable fuel vehicles. Significant investment has been made internationally in this renewable energy sector. Uber has committed $800 million to help their drivers transition to EVs by 2025. And power companies are making a smart move as they shift from EVs means that they will have a negative impact on their oil and gas revenues. So there's a role for them in managing the supply and demand for electricity and supporting the development of alternative fuels and long-range batteries. Barbados has a company called Mega Power. It also has a presence in Antigua, and it has sold about 500 EVs locally so far. They also have projects going in St. Lucia, St. Vincent, Turks and Caicos, the Bahamas, and Trinidad. And they're pioneering right now a new battery reuse lab with a grant from the Caribbean Export Development Agency to reuse EV batteries as storage for solar PV systems. EVs are on the cusp of mass production. In this rise of EVs with few parts and lifetime guarantees, does this mean the end of the road for vehicle repair shops? Will gas stations now disappear and be replaced by charging stations? Will gas station attendants lose their jobs? They were rare anywhere outside of our region anyhow, before even the current generation of electric vehicles arrived on our shores. Will looking for oil and drilling stop? Is it likely that this will no longer be part of our landscape? For instance, here's something. Who remembers Kodak film? In 1998, Kodak had 170,000 employees and sold 85% of all photo paper. 3 years later, they were bankrupt because smartphones have now largely replaced cameras in a very short period of time. Now, with the coming of artificial intelligence or AI, rapid changes in the transportation sector is certain. It's already started and we need to be prepared to respond to it. So we have autonomous vehicles. This is a marriage between electric vehicles and artificial intelligence. I've been fortunate enough to experience the Bay Area rapid transit system while attending UC Berkeley, and the BART network includes this underwater Transbay tube that's devoted exclusively to high-speed, automatically controlled electric trains. While I was in San Jose, recently the first city to carry out field tests of automated driving and to measure the challenges of having regular road traffic. And so these things, two things have been happening simultaneously, and notice that the BART lines now have 2 lines that end in San Jose. And the question will be, what happens next? Well, they say that Elon Musk is dreaming up shared autonomous vehicles. So of course, there is some apprehension with these autonomous vehicles, and there is a group called the Union of Concerned Scientists, and they have worked on transportation-related policy issues for decades. They advocate for equitable low pollution vehicles, fuels, and infrastructure. And in February 2017, they released a policy brief that outlines the challenges and benefits of self-driving technology. And they identify these main points that for safer transportation, it must be safe for all road users. Electric and fuel efficient gasoline hybrids for cleaner vehicles. They looked at integrated transit. It must be generally used to improve public transportation. It must give all people access to clean, affordable transportation. It should support affected persons, those persons that might lose their current jobs. They need to employ them in other areas available, especially to underrepresented groups. They're looking at open data sharing on the performance while ensuring that appropriate privacy and cybersecurity protections are in place. And number 7 was livable cities. That autonomous vehicles could either increase congestion and pollution, or they could lead to more shared rides, fewer cars, freeing up public space. The policy should prioritize the needs of the whole community and not just the individual vehicles. These are all policies that we can adopt even before autonomous vehicle technology reaches our shores. We also look at smart cities. And a smart city is when it can connect, analyze, and use huge amounts of data from urban planning to garbage collection. It will require a complex network of interconnected sensors, devices, and softwares, which would allow the city to become a more sustainable and efficient space for its residents. And the technology includes information and communications technology, connected physical devices using the Internet of Things network, and of course, geographical information systems. For transportation, smart technology can be used to connect vehicles, infrastructure, public transit, and people to improve mobility and safety. You, for instance, can place sensors in streets to track vehicles. Smartphones can be used to identify which parking spaces might be available in a parking lot, and also alert parking enforcement officers. There's smart street lighting that can reduce energy consumption by staying dim when there are no cars or people around. For buildings, sensors can detect when a particular room is unoccupied and adjust the lighting and temperature to that space. Sensors can also detect when garbage skips might be full. It can detect the number of people waiting at a bus stop, and therefore routes and services can be scheduled accordingly. The one difficulty with a smart city is that building a smart city infrastructure can take years, and research is essential before making large and costly decisions, and each city is unique. The security of the data is another concern. As with other technologies, it can be used to reinforce existing inequalities, or it can alleviate them. We also have a look at digital currencies. Many of these currencies aren't really about the transfer of money, but it's more about making business better, smarter, safer, and more efficient. It also allows people to be part of that financial inclusion, even if they don't have bank accounts, because they can complete their money transactions easily using their cell phones. Concerns with this, of course, are privacy concerns, because cash right now allows you to spend without anyone knowing that you and the seller, whatever it is that you have bought, no one else has to know that. They also don't need to know where or when you bought the particular item. And of course, there are security concerns, and there are concerns with illicit activity like money laundering. Then we have a quick look. There are the PPPs, or the 3Ps. Our governments can't do it alone. And of course, on some occasions, there will have to be agreement where the private sector can assume some of the risk and management responsibility for public transportation and our infrastructural assets. And of course, there are pros and cons to this process. In conclusion, on land, we must strive for inclusivity and therefore provide for those who have mobility challenges and the vulnerable road user by providing accessible sidewalks, accessible public transportation, shared protected paths for walking and cycle networks, and the facilities that will support them. We also know that our world is going green. We must control and limit the number of secondhand vehicles that are exported from the industrialized countries. Barbados now restricts vehicles to 4 years or younger. And we've gone a step further because we have the goal of 100% electric vehicles by 2030 with the associated charging infrastructure. And of course, there are fiscal policy tools like fuel tax, public transportation subsidies. These should be applied in a very consistent, coherent, and market-conforming manner. And one policy shouldn't counteract the intended effects of another. There's a perception that public transportation requires high subsidies, but this debate often disregards the fact that there are large hidden subsidies benefiting private car users in urban areas. For example, in Bridgetown, on-street parking is still absolutely free. And it also disregards that the benefits of a mobile society can be ranked with the benefits of an educated and healthy one. It has been established that we in the Caribbean have similar challenges and struggles. I believe our future does not lie in technological advances alone. We must be able to take some time to develop well thought out solutions and to be prepared to change course and be agile, to be curious and innovative, to learn from and with each other. In our pursuit of efficient and sustainable transportation systems, we must keep safety in our planning and nature and our environment at the heart of the economics discussion. Our individual country transportation plans should be coordinated with the area's total plan for future development, and all plans must be supported by informed policies. We know that travelers value short trip times, avoid transfers and waiting times, and they want door-to-door service, reliability, comfort, guarantees seating security, flexibility, and privacy. The automobile provides all of these appealing characteristics with the exception of the operator being able to read or sleep or do some other activity while traveling. In order for other modes to compete, they must deliver the same attributes. I once watched a TED Talk video where the speaker spoke about Muir Woods and its redwood trees. And I visited these woods and marveled at these giant majestic trees and how they grew. From a seed no bigger than one from a tomato, a tree can grow to 112 meters and have a width of 7 meters at its base. Most trees are over 800 years old. They're the tallest trees on earth, but their roots only go down to 3 to 4 meters. They create their strength to withstand powerful winds and floods by reaching out their roots more than 15 meters from the trunk and by living in groves where their roots can intertwine. They give support directly and indirectly to each other, holding on to each other and greatly increasing their stability. They know that unity is strength. The redwoods have an unusual ability to regenerate, and new sprouts may come directly from a stump or a down tree's root system as a clone. The complex soils on the forest floor also contribute not only to the redwood's growth, but also to the verdant greenery and fungi and other trees which receive shelter from the giants, and in return, these ferns and mosses help to regenerate the soils. As the TED Talk speaker said, this is nature giving humanity a lesson. I close now with 2 quotes from 2 of our prime ministers. The first speaks globally and the second regionally. In February this year, with reference to the COVID fight, the Honorable Mia Mottley, Prime Minister of Barbados, said in her address to the 22nd Forum of Ministers of Environment for Latin America and the Caribbean, our ability to do so has been compromised by the fact that each of us has taken individual action rather than globally coordinated actions. And on April the 9th, the Honorable Dr. Ralph E. Gonzalez said while speaking of the Soufriere volcano eruptions, I want us in this region to use natural disasters like these to strengthen the bonds of regionalism. It brings home that we are one Caribbean family. Now, we should not wait for a pandemic nor any other disaster for us to come together. We should understand that it's healthy to consider other points of views, that we can learn a lot from each other and that we can appreciate each other's perspectives, even though we may not agree. We can collaborate to conquer any challenge when we recognize that we can accomplish far more and are better and stronger together. Each country is relevant to the well-being of the region, and none can reasonably possess all the skills, knowledge, and experience necessary to solve a complex problem. Problem solving needs the collective intelligence that our diverse group of Caribbean people can bring to the discussion. Diversity should not mean compromising quality, and our dispersion should not translate to disconnection. Our future depends on it. I thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Mrs. Bennett-Ennis. Thank you for that comprehensive perspective in terms of the similarities in all of our situations, and certainly highlighting some of the things that we should be doing. I'm going to go straight into Professor Mark Raymond now, who will be talking on our first sub-theme of Revitalizing Towns. Professor Raymond is one of our experts, if I can call him that, because he has been practicing in Trinidad and Tobago for many years, but he is now director of the Graduate School of Architecture at the University of Johannesburg, which is the largest graduate school of architecture in Africa. He is also currently the Plim Distinguished Professor at the University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign. So over to you, Professor Raymond.
Can you hear me? Can you hear me?
Can you come a little closer to the mic, Mark?
Can you hear me?
Very well, thank you. Go ahead.
Okay. Yes, well, Sawubona from Johannesburg in South Africa. Thank you very much for inviting me. I'm excited to participate in this event and to share some of my thoughts. The title that was initially given was Revitalizing Towns, but I've kind of expanded that a little bit and tried to think a bit more broadly about the relationship between the discipline that I am grounded in, that of architecture, and also urban design and a little bit of urban planning, to talk about the intersection between different design practices and how those intersections, I think, need to be more effectively activated for us to obtain some sort of the transformation that I believe the environment needs. I think very often the different and siloed nature of professional practices can often lead to complexity and sometimes frustration in the fulfilling of a range of what are essentially planning objectives or developmental objectives, with each discipline, in a sense, prioritizing or privileging its own voice rather than making perhaps more vigorous efforts to work collaboratively. And in my professional experience, as well as in more recent years, my academic experience, the best results really come from effective collaboration between disciplines. So I'm hoping to bring some thoughts on that and how we collaborate and how ideas need to be integrated, and in the hope that that generates an area for discussion, particularly as it relates to urban design and the way that architecture and urban design impact and interact with ideas about transportation. I think if we don't have conversations like that, we can end up with often quite disastrous and not necessarily effective results. So I think it's important to have these discussions so that we can walk together and make progress. So I'm going to talk to you a little bit about the I guess what I would call the context for mobility and movement. I think really what we're talking about comes down to some quite essential issues. People need to move around. They need to move themselves, to transport themselves, and sometimes they need to transport things. And they generally do that within a range of types of spaces that we're all familiar with. And understanding how that operation functions and works and how it might work, I think, is a really important thing to conceptualize broadly, rather than simply always trying to reduce it down to numbers or requirements or regulations. We need to, in a way, imagine the world that we want to live in. going to talk about a range of models in a way that that we work in, from the colonial landscape of the Caribbean, based on plantation economies and colonization. Trinidad and many other islands moved towards a highly kind of modern post-independence and post-colonial world, embodied here in the plan of Brasilia, in the case of Latin America, where the idea of creating cities that would be, heroic modern cities that would do away with the sort of the dark and unsanitary past and create a kind of heroic utopian future for us all, I think captured the imagination or captured the post-independent spirit. And the car, the vehicle, and the privately owned vehicle featured very, very prominently in that imaginary, in that imagining of how the world might be or how our futures might be. And it was reflected all over the Caribbean, in Trinidad, within the context of architecture, with buildings such as the Queen's Hall. This is Colin Laird's original competition winning design for the Queen's Hall in its original location, which is actually opposite the Roxy Roundabout, not where it is in St. Anne's. Or subsequently the Hilton Hotel. Buildings and in this case buildings, but artifacts that represent this modern aspiration, and also reflected in many other dimensions of society, include the implementation of a highway system, building of sophisticated road system in Trinidad and Tobago, and policies reflected in many other places in the Caribbean. But these utopian and heroic kind of visions of how the Caribbean might be and how Trinidad might be, I think soon ended up, as they did all over the world, in rather a mess, as the sort of serpentine freeway was superimposed on the fabric, this sort of post-colonial fabric of various colonial cities. This is Ikeja in Lagos in Nigeria, and a prime example of a sort of freeway just sort of bursting through an area. And these highways and these freeways, were serving the function of meeting the demand for more and more space for vehicular traffic, but causing, enormous problems in terms of breaking up the landscape, disturbing the landscape, and radically affecting how people lived and where they lived. I think on reflection, whilst these represented kind of a utopian vision, this is the overpass in Trinidad, they were also highly disruptive and have led this sort of dependence and this focus on the car and vehicular traffic as being the kind of primary means for us to move around. This is I think a scene we're all familiar with. And I think that we need to recognize this dependency on vehicular traffic, on the automobile, as being highly problematic, and one that is a major contributor to the current unsustainable configuration of the world, with the depletion of fossil fuels, climate change, global warming. This is the system that has contributed to that in a significant way. So we really do need to look for ways, when we're thinking of how we move around, that don't just localize the individual and specific problems presented by the system, but I think look to radically overturn it. There's a lot of speculation now about what the world might be like if we don't do something about urbanization. We don't do something about climate change. These images by GMJ in London showing the kind of, area around Buckingham Palace becoming a squatter settlement, and the area in front of Big Ben becoming a paddy field, all sort of quite humorous and ironic, but apocalyptic visions of the fact that if we don't do things in a meaningful way about the current condition, that we will end up in quite serious trouble. And transportation, I think, has an absolutely key role in how we attend to that. So how do we engage? What are the possibilities inherent with the knowledge we have that might point us towards, a more effective way of doing things? And I've got a couple of thoughts about that I'd like to share with you. Examples, not as models that we should emulate, but showing that there are ways of thinking of how we work in different contexts that can treat and deal with the variety of conditions that we have in the Caribbean. I think one of the critical things, and certainly in most of our urban spaces, we have fairly strong, robust urban form. The morphology of our cities is established and is qualitative. It has a quality that I think we don't do away with. In Havana, or here in Pointe-à-Pitre in Guadeloupe, or even in some of the less salubrious parts of Port of Spain, there's culture, that the built form and how we use the built form and how we use space, as this image of Lagos in Nigeria, actually contributes significantly to the culture. So how do we marry our needs for movement with ideas for culture? What are the models that we can engage with? There's a lot of activity and culture that can take place on the street beyond them being conduits for vehicular traffic. In New York, the idea of the food, in the United States, the idea of the food truck, I think, is an important idea, showing how culinary culture can take place in streets, that streets can become public spaces, places for interaction, not just places for mobility and movement, and can encourage perhaps more use of pedestrian people walking, moving around the city on foot. And walk around any Caribbean city, and the streets constitute public spaces. People use the street. People use the space between buildings actively. It's an important part of collective culture. So I think we should engage that and engage how the street and the idea of the street is not just a track for vehicles, but we should really embrace it and understand it as actually a cultural place. Not just for human festivals or human interaction, but a whole range of activities that includes and embraces movement in its broadest conceptual terms. I always come back to this really compelling image of Frederick Street in Port of Spain, as it was maybe 50, 60, 70 years ago, where we see a very interesting use of the street in terms of mobility. One can see the tram lines in the center being used as a sort of convenient track for cyclists. You can see the enormous number of cycles that are being used, something that would seem really bizarre. If I went to work on my bike in Port of Spain, it would be seen as eccentric. But 60 or 70 years ago, it certainly wasn't eccentric. It was an efficient, useful, and healthy means of moving around. We can also see the generosity of the sidewalk and the owners of the buildings providing shade, that also the shading devices also advertising their business, and people looking on, people walking down the street. Everybody's active, everybody's moving around. And I might add, people looking slightly more slim and perhaps in better shape than one might find today if one was to walk down Frederick Street. And that might seem a humorous comment, but it is interesting to see when one looks at photographs in these times, because of the sheer movement that people had to undertake, how much fitter they looked and in what better shape they were, which I think speaks to the idea of sustainability in a very particular way in terms of health. So perhaps what's needed is really some quite radical thinking and some radical reformation of how we think about things. This really wonderful image by Joaquin Torres Garcia from Uruguay from the 70s, I think, no, the 1940s, where he inverted South America. He looked at South America, Latin America in a very different way by placing the North on top and completely transforming how we looked at something that we're so used to seeing in a particular way. And I think this idea of reconceptualizing how we move and the way in which we move is really, really important. And we should stand back from the data and the facts and the figures and think about, how do we want the space that we occupy to be? How do we want to be able to move around in it? And what is in our best interests in terms of what we think about? Island of Trinidad in 1930 was a landscape that was still a largely agricultural landscape, and that was developed and formulated. The morphology of it largely developed, and particularly in the East-West corridor, along the line of the railway track. If one looks at the names of those stations, they represent key points now in terms of the urban nodes that exist within the conurbation that is Port of Spain. And we can see the development and the evolution of those little nodes that followed where the primary rail stops were, actually constituting the kind of the form and the structure of how the city developed over time. Quite an important thing to note that this was a sort of transit driven, the physical development was driven by these sort of transit nodes. Quite an interesting mode or operational development. And then over that, we've then overlaid this system of roads that gets ever more complex. And this diagram that I drew about 10 or 12 years ago is probably significantly grayer than it is now, as Port of Spain and Chaguanas develop into one large conurbation. Peter Calthorpe develops this idea of transit-oriented development, transit-driven development, with this idea of pedestrian pockets. And this is a schematic diagram that shows how development could take place, developing around a rail line that leads to an urban center, with a kind of distributed nodal type of development that revolves around the track, but is not concentrated. It's distributed from the main distribution line, and leading to some really quite interesting formal urban ideas that might emerge from that, different typologies and different ways in which cities could be understood, and perhaps made primarily pedestrian. So once one arrives in this town, one could walk. There would always be a sort of radius within which one could walk or move to lighter forms of transit in order to go to your particular locale. I think it's a really interesting idea that allows development to take place in a distributed way rather than just a gradual accretion that is just simply driven by economics or land development, but it actually gives development a form and a structure that integrates the idea of movement and transportation with the development and evolution of specifically determined urban forms. And within spaces like this, one could conjure up a whole range of delightful urban spaces, building on models that are regional. These are some images from Santo Domingo, for example, showing that spaces without cars can be really extraordinarily pleasant and accommodating in a way that many of the spaces that are, in a sense, devalued because of the primacy of the vehicle cannot perform. On another level, if we look a little bit closer at a city and look at Port of Spain, this lovely quote by Gillian Tyndall that talks about how colonial cities, that because they were built defensively, often the reasons why they were built defensively often lead to problems in their subsequent growth. Port of Spain is a case in point, surrounded by hills. The only way to move across or along it is to sort of cut the city off from the sea. It's an important point to note. And if we look at how Port of Spain developed over time, developing in this accretive way over a period of 150, 200 years, leading to the current configuration of the city, with the port and the water being cut off from the city by the primary route that separates it, and cutting off the grid and the accommodation, the human accommodation that the city could afford because of the dominance of the need for vehicular traffic. So we've got this kind of conflict in a way between the transport and between the kind of human or social need of the architecture and the urban design. And a wonderful example of where this conflict and this type of density has been addressed, I think, very effectively, and I'm sure many of you will be aware of it, is the city of Barcelona. Barcelona developed on what's known as the Cedar Grid, a beautiful system of gridded blocks that works extremely well, housing a whole multitude and range of different types of function and use, and which has an extraordinarily efficient and harmonious traffic system. Yes, there are routes for cars, and cars seem to run freely, but there are also many options and modes of transport. There's the subway, there are the tramways that run throughout the city, and all accommodated in a really effectively and well integrated urban infrastructure that has as its primary figure the pedestrian. So when you're in Barcelona, you always feel, in a sense, privileged above everything else, above the tram, above the car, above the subway, above everything else. People go on scooters, people walk around. It's a really excellent model of how an integrated system, calling upon skills in a variety of disciplines, can conspire to create an extraordinary quality of life in the space and also make movement and mobility very, very easy and comfortable, and in many cases enjoyable. It's a system that, in terms of how it is then reflected in the operation of the city blocks, has come up with some, recently with some very interesting ideas where, in order to mitigate the amount of traffic that still exists in the city, they've reduced the density of traffic that exists in the current grid by creating what are known as super blocks, where they reduce the number of active roads. And in the first pilot projects in Poblenou, as is indicated here, they green certain blocks without cutting off the traffic. They limit the traffic. They kind of diffuse the traffic and diminish the impact of the traffic through the appropriation of the routes between the blocks and the limiting of the use of the routes between the blocks, and the reclamation, the reclaiming, the recolonization of the streets that exist within the blocks for public use, for playgrounds, for sports, for community use, and for a whole variety of very, very effective uses. I think these are really powerful examples of how, through ingenuity, through creative thought, rather than thinking of transportation and the resolution of issues of transportation as being simply ameliorating the condition for the car, actually trying to ameliorate the condition of the pedestrian, and working within urban systems, working within townscape systems, or even rural systems or landscape systems, to try and generate solutions, to try and generate possibilities that improve the quality of life of people who live and occupy the cities, and whilst also accommodating what is very likely to be in the future a much diminished role for the automobile. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mark. Thank you very much, and very thought-provoking. Just to let a number of questions coming into the on the chat. We will try to accommodate those questions during today. If not, they will be accommodated over the next couple of days. And if anything is left outside of that, we will be giving you getting the presenters to submit some answers to you.